From the heights of New York City, welcome to Inwood Artworks on Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. I'm Aaron Sims.
And I'm Jonathan Bell.
And this is Live and Local. It's our podcast dedicated to showcasing the musicians of Upper Manhattan. We talk with them about what they do, and best of all, listen to them perform live in one of our favorite local venues. Today, we are excited to welcome composer, pianist, and Inwood resident, Jerome Kitzke. Jerome is originally from southwestern shore of Lake Michigan in Milwaukee. He has taught himself to be as much as a storyteller as he is a composer. Some of his stories are about life's personal roads, like the Redness of blood and Sunflower Sutra, which both express his love for his blood family. Many, however, like Haunted America and the Paha Sapa Give Back, are about the roads that go looking for what it means to be an American in the late 20th century to early 21st century, especially as it relates to the connection between how we live on this land and the way we came to live on it. Kitzke's music celebrates America's vitality in its purest forms. It thrives on the spirit of driving jazz, Plains Indian songs, and beat generation poetry where freedom and ritual converge. It is a direct, dramatic, and visceral experience, always with an ear to the sacred ground. He's been featured twice on WNYC's New Sounds Live with John Schaefer, and has been a fellow at the MacDowell Colony, Yaddo, the Millennium Colony, and many others. In the summer of 2017, the Fales Library at NYU began archiving Mr. Kitzke's life work for their downtown music collection. And in October of 2018, Tribeca New Music presented a concert of his entire repertoire for an amplified speaking pianist. But today, he makes his Inwood Artworks debut. We are thrilled to have him play for you live today. Ladies and gentlemen, Jerome Kitzke.
Automobile, I go find my old companion in his house on the Western Ocean. Ha, 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 ha. I'd honk my horn at his manly gate. Inside his wife and 3 children sprawl naked on the living room floor. He'd come running out to my car, full of heroic beer, and jump screaming at the wheel, for he is the greater driver. We'd pilgrimage to the highest mounts of our earlier Rocky Mountain visions, laughing in each other's arms, delights surpassing the highest Rockies. And after old agony, drunk with New Year's, bounding toward the snowy horizon, blasting the dashboard with the original Bop Hot Rod on the mountain, we batter up the cloudy highway where angels of anxieties careen through the trees and scream out of the engine. We burn all night on the Jack Pine Peak, seen from Denver in the summer dark, forest-like, unnatural radiance illuminating the mountaintop. Childhood, youth time, age and eternity would open like sweet trees in the nights of another spring and dumbfound us with love. For we can see together the beauty of souls hidden like diamonds in the clock of the world, like Chinese magicians can confound the immortals with their intellectuality hidden in the mist. In the green automobile, which I have invented, imagined, and visioned on the roads of the world, more real than the engine on a track in the desert, purer than Greyhound, and swifter than physical jet plane. Denver, Denver. Will return, roaring across the city and county building lawn, which catches the pure emerald flame, streaming in the wake of our auto. This time we'll buy up the city. I cashed a great check in my skull bank to found a miraculous college of the body up on the bus terminal roof. But first, we'll drive the stations of downtown, pool house, flop house, jazz joint, jail, whorehouse, down Folsom to the darkest alleys of Larimer. Whoa! Paying respects to Denver's father, lost on the railroad tracks, stupor of wine and silence, hallowing the slum of his decades. Salute him and his saintly suitcase of dark muscatel, drink and smash the sweet bottles and diesels in allegiance. Hey! Then we go driving drunk on boulevards where armies march and still parade, staggering under the invisible banner of reality, hurtling through the streets in the auto of our fate. We share an archangelic cigarette and tell each other's fortunes, flames of supernatural illumination, bleak rainy gaps of time, great art learned in desolation, and we beat apart after 6 decades. And on an asphalt crossroad, deal with each other in princely gentleness once more, recalling famous dead talks of other cities. The windshield's full of tears, rain wets our naked breasts. We kneel together in the shade amid the traffic of night in paradise, and now renew the solitary vow we made each other take in Texas once. I can't inscribe here. How many Saturday nights will be made drunken by this legend? How will young Denver come to mourn a forgotten sexual angel? How many boys will strike the black piano in imitation of the excess of a native saint? Or girls fall wanton under a specter in the high schools of melancholy night? While all the time in eternity, in the wan light of this poem's radio, we'll sit behind forgotten shades, hearkening the lost jazz of all Saturdays. Kneel. We'll be real heroes now in a war between our cocks and time. Let's be the angels of the world's desire and take the world to bed with us before we die. Sleeping alone or with companion, girl or fairy, sheep or dream. I'll fail of lack love, you satiety. All men fall. Our fathers fell before. But resurrecting that lost flesh is but a moment's work of mind, an ageless monument to love and the imagination, memorial built out of our own bodies, consumed by the invisible poem. We'll shudder in Denver and endure though blood and wrinkles blind our eyes. Woo, 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 woo. So, this green automobile, I give you in flight a present from my imagination. We will go riding over the Rockies, we'll go on riding all night long until dawn. Then back to your railroad, the SP, your house, your children, and broken leg destiny, you ride down the plains in the morning. Oh, 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 oh. Oh. And back to my visions. My office. And eastern apartment. I'll return to New York. Yo!
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show, Jerome. It's great to see you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Could you tell us, please, what you just played for us?
I played a piece from the year 2000 I wrote called The Green Automobile. It's for the amplified speaking pianist genre that Tony DeMar and Fred Jeffsky kind of started up in the early 90s. My piece utilizes Allen Ginsberg's 1953 poem, The Green Automobile, from his Reality Sandwiches collection.
Cool.
Well, that's an incredible, this is a hybrid, a musical hybrid that I've never encountered before. So thank you for expanding my musical universe. It's hard to understate, in a way, my admiration for you in the sense of an artist who has clearly found his niche, his calling. I'm fascinated to know how you integrated so many parts of yourself and how it ended up manifesting ultimately in this type of performing, which incorporates spoken word with what sounds like almost like Cecil Taylor type free improv, but yet it, on the other hand, there seems to be, not that there's a contradiction here, but there's a lot of precision and rigor and preparation. And so I'm kind of interested to know also the balance between through composedness versus how much improvisation is going on here. Would a second performance of Green Automobile now, how radically different would it be? Like different performances, how much would I note in terms of like compositional differences? That's like 2 or 3 questions there. Take whatever you want from there and go for it.
Well, I guess I'll start with the last one, and you might have to remind me what the other questions
sure. Okay,
were.
I'll be working on that.
If I played the Green Automobile right now for you again, it would sound the same.
Okay.
It's completely notated.
Okay.
I, being the composer, however, and being a skilled improviser at the piano, I add little things here and there that are probably not in the score. But even if I played it again a second time and a third time, you would still feel, oh, that sounds like the same piece. It's very rigidly, formally structured.
But it sounds like it has a real extemporaneous vibe to it. So, I would think that my response is not unique. I would think that many people might hear you and think that there was a lot of improvisation that they just heard, yet what you're saying, it's note for note composed.
As a performer, I've now been writing music for 51 years, believe it or not. As a performer, in my entire performing life, I've been an improviser.
Okay.
I play a couple of my pieces that are notated, but I don't play anyone else's notated music. So I'm mostly, as a performer, an improviser.
Okay.
The Green Automobile began, I was at the Malay colony in the year 2000, and there was stuff going on there with interpersonality conflicts and stuff that I wasn't able to work on the project I wanted to work on, and I had to find a way to get other things done. So what I did is that place is in the Berkshires, and I just walked and hiked all over the Berkshires, and I've been extremely fond of Allen Ginsberg's poetry for a long time. He's written thousands of poems, but there's about 10 or 11 of them that I just adore, and it includes the Green Automobile. So I was thinking about that poem at the Malay colony, and I just sat at a piano and just spoke and played. So that piece did start out of kind of an improvisational sense. Perhaps that comes through in the final written version.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't tell. But and yeah, what was
was that the genesis of that piece? Was that the Malay?
Yeah.
Okay, and was that the also the beginning of an interest in the speaking pianist type performance, or had you been doing
No, I had already written Sunflower Sutra in 1998, 1999 on a commission for Tony DeMar.
Okay.
For a New Sounds Live concert with John Schaefer. And that was also Ginsberg's poetry, Sunflower Sutra. That piece I was writing while my oldest sister Mary was dying of cancer, and it was a way for me to deal with what was going on in my personal life. And the poem, Sunflower Sutra, just was perfect for that moment in time. I'm a kind of composer that if there's really difficult personal things going on in my life, whether it be my own life or what's going on in the country and the world around us, it's hard for me sometimes to think of composition. But for Sunflower Sutra, I really delved into it. And my sister actually ended up getting to hear the piece 2 weeks before she died.
Wow.
So that was meaningful. So anyway, I had gotten into the speaking pianist genre before that. And then even before that, in 1994, I wrote my piece, The Animist Child, which is for toy piano, written for Wendy Mae Chambers. There's no text, but it's speaking and playing on the toy piano.
Okay.
So I was very attuned to the idea of that, and I had heard Tony DeMar do De Profundis, Rzewski's De Profundis, on a Bang on a Can marathon at Alice Tully Hall. He was very early in the show, and I didn't know this piece, and it was fairly new. This would have been in probably 94 or something. I think De Profundis was written in 92. And Tony did the piece, and I was going to stay for a lot of the marathon. I couldn't. I was so blown away and moved by this, I couldn't think of anything else.
Wow.
The piece was fantastic. It's a great, great piece, De Profundis. But Tony's performance of it just lit this sort of fire under me. I'd already been delving into this notion of this kind of genre, but his performance was so powerful and so theatrical and just meaningful. I ran into him in the lobby when I left, and he knew who I was, and we talked, and he knew my music somehow, and he asked me then, would I be interested in writing a piece for this genre? And I'm like, yeah! So then as these things happen, with commissions, you have to find the money, all that stuff. So it took a few years for that to come about, but that's how Sunflower Sutra came about from a practical standpoint. And so and speaking pianist is not in the classical world, it's kind of a new thing from the early 90s, but sitting at a piano and talking and all that's very old.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious that because you compose the work you perform, and vice versa, as Jonathan says too, like there's a very theatrical element to your work, and so I'm curious if you prefer having your music experienced live in performance or listened to.
Oh, either is great. They're different.
Yeah.
They're very different. I have a piece, for instance, for 4 drum sets, and a large bass drum and piano, amplified piano, called the Paha Sapa Give Back, and experiencing that work live. My favorite performance of it was at William Patterson University in their big auditorium. The people were doing it on the stage, and the 4 percussionists are around this drum, and they're banging away. A chunk of the ceiling fell down, and didn't hit anybody, but it smashed right into the floor next to them. So that you don't get that from listening to a recording. So that was very exciting.
Can't beat that.
But then again, the recording of that piece was so beautifully well done. It's a different thing. They're both powerful in their own way.
Gotcha.
I want to pick up on a sentence in your bio that just mentions the convergence of freedom and ritual. And I wanted to know if that maybe is a point of departure for you in terms of maybe expanding a little bit more on your aesthetic and musically and the place of performance around the notion of ritual?
Well, I mean, the word ritual, many people will define it in many different ways. I've been to various rituals. That would be the standard definition of the ritual. But then I think of concerts, the convening of performers coming together, even before the concert, the talking, the speaking, then the rehearsing, and even the composing of the work for me. It's all part of the ritual of eventually getting to the point where you tell the story you're wanting to tell. So when I do a concert and I have a group that I've had multiple members of and they come and go, it's called the Mad Coyote for the last 30 years. And so those people, we love each other as human beings, and that figures into this. But when we get together for rehearsals for a concert, it's more than just music business. There's a thing going on that's not blood relation, but just as close, and that becomes ritualistic for me. And then some pieces like Sunflower Sutra or the Paha Sapa Give Back, they come off as in live performance as rituals.
Does this come from any interest in any philosophies, religion?
Not really.
So okay.
No.
All right.
No. I mean, I've been a long time, for 35 years, involved in various aspects of the relation between white Europeans and Native Americans throughout history, and the events that occurred throughout our history.
Okay.
That I worked on things that are about illuminating those interactions, and I've written pieces that are about that. And I have close friends and family on the Pine Ridge Reservation, so I've been there many, many times, and I've been invited by those people, by my Lakota friends, my Oglala Lakota friends, to come to some of their rituals.
Right.
They've invited me, and so that no doubt figures in somehow to my thinking as well. That experience with those people out there.
Very interesting. Could you also dive in a little bit about yourself as a improvising performer? What you've been involved in, as in that vein?
Oh, sure. Do you mean involved in terms of the kinds of groups I play with, that kind of thing?
Yeah. That's a part of your bio. I don't know about. So.
I had my first rock band in 1968. I was 13. And so we were terrible, but it was fantastic. It was wonderful, and it involved a lot of improvisation, learning the tunes of the day and all that, but still a lot of improvisation. I played Farfisa combo compact organ. It's wonderful, cheesy, beautiful sounding thing. And I then, when I started playing more piano after that, and I was never a good piano student. I did go to college. I taught myself to play a keyboard. I taught myself to compose. I was writing music before I even went to university. I'd written chamber orchestra pieces. I'd written woodwind quintets and things like that. Without knowing at all what I was doing, the bliss of ignorance was actually, at that age, was pretty terrific. In fact, one case, I wrote a chamber orchestra piece where, and if you know about score writing, as you do, being a composer, you write the score and then you do the parts. This piece, I wrote the parts first and then turned them into a score. That's completely ass backwards, but it was part of the, that I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to do it.
Right.
I had a fire lit under me, and I was off to the musical races. But I was not a good piano student. I mean, the idea of sitting down and practicing and all the hand exercises and doing all that stuff just didn't appeal to me, and I was no good at it. So sitting down to play Mozart or Beethoven, it just wasn't my thing.
I'm not sure Hannon appeals to anyone.
No,
No.
But when I would sit down to practice, because I did have piano teachers in college, they made you do that stuff, and they just thought I was abhorrent at my technique and all, but because I was doing things incorrectly, quote unquote. But I would sit down to practice. I would just start, doing Mozart, and then I would just start improvising, and I just couldn't stop. So
That's so interesting.
and then I in Milwaukee, I was in a group called the Great Lakes Poem Band with the poets Jim Hazard and Susan Fear, these wonderful Midwestern poets, and Bob Budney on drums. So it was drums, piano, and these two poets. And they read, and we just played for hours on end. We played behind them and with them and under them. And
So that whole collaboration, interdisciplinary thing with literature elements has been there for a long time.
the very first piece I ever wrote in 1970 was based on some of the thematic elements of family in John Steinbeck's novella, The Pearl. The very first piece, little piano piece. I still play these little piano pieces I wrote in 1970 as a 15-year-old to this day. I play them just to stay connected to them. The woman, English teacher, inspired me to be a composer, asked me to write music for this Steinbeck project. And I said, I don't write music. What are you talking about? She said, I'll give it a try. So I did. I mean, I understood composing was, putting notes and sounds together in ordered fashion, blah, blah, and all that. And I tried it, and I discovered I had a talent I had no idea I had. And that was it. I was just off to the races. So the very first piece was out of literature. So I think that's part of why I'm so, to this day, I like working with language. I've written instrumental pieces, but they're often based on something literal or literature-wise. But I like using text in my pieces. So the Great Lakes Poem Band existed. Then in New York, I started a trio with Harvey Sorgen, a drummer in Woodstock, and Steve Rust, a bass player in Woodstock, called Big Tent. We were about 20 years now we play together. Not frequently, not as much as we'd like. We just made a record 2 years ago called I Am Waiting, Big Tent Digs Ferlinghetti. And Ferlinghetti knew about the project. He died just recently, but we got his permission, and there's a picture of him in it, and it's a CD on I think a Polish record label. And it was, those guys are so good at improvising, and I am what I am, and we just make this thing happen, and it's my great joy to improvise. But when I write concert pieces, everything is exactly very specifically notated. Right. My scores are done by hand. My scores have hung in art galleries here and there. I start from blank paper. I draw the stabs. I do all that myself, which I think I probably got from being mesmerized by George Crumb's scores in the late 60s, early 70s. There's a ritual there, if you want to talk about ritual, the score writing. Yes. You mentioned the Fales archiving, Fales Library archiving my work. They made this terrific 21-minute film about me, just about my notational practices. That could sound really dry sounding, and like, boy, that can't be very interesting. But they captured something that's really, it captures a bit of how, for me, it's not just about the music I'm writing, it's about the creation of the physical score from nothing.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, too, it's interesting to say that because since you don't use a computer program or Sibelius or whatever these things are these days, writing is very much about not only the subject matter, but the person themselves and writing during that moment in your life. And I think it becomes your pen to paper. It's pretty special, I think, and maybe some things come out of you then that wouldn't come out of you at a different time. So can you speak a little bit about what inspires you to tell the stories you do at those moments and how your life intersects with when you are writing?
Sure. Well, you kind of mentioned it in your intro. I have pieces I've written that are really pointedly, specifically just to express love for my blood family. Sunflower Sutra was for my sister. The Redness of Blood was a dedication piece, a 25-minute piece for 2 percussion, piano, and clarinet for my blood family, 6 members. And then other pieces like the Paha Sapa Give Back, the piece I mentioned. Paha Sapa is Lakota for black hills, hills that are black. And I wanted to write a piece that basically supported the ongoing movement to return the Paha Sapa to the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people based on the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. These are things that have been going on for over 100 years now, and people are still trying to rectify these treaty situations. So all I wanted to do is write a piece that said, Paha Sapa, give them back.
Yeah, I mean, it's very as I looked at, well, not back to your work and as a 15-year-old, but I've looked back quite a bit, and your compositions have really related to the theme of exploring your feelings, reconciling our cultural past, I feel. I can see that as a kind of thread between them all, or many of them. That's not the Ginsberg poem, or Ginsberg's work for that part, but also our current relationships with the idea of what it means to be an American. I think it's a hard thing for us to look back, and we feel somewhat powerless at times because we weren't there a lot, I think, and I can feel that frustration and also the great deal of emotion and empathy, I think, in your work towards those cultural reckonings. I'll just say what they are, and I think it's funny because I've run into you in the park a few times during COVID at Inwood Hill Park, and I'm wondering what you've perceived in nature and our larger culture has found way to you moving forward as you look towards telling new stories, because you've done so much with the past. I'm just like worrying. Are you looking? Are you looking forward into the future?
Oh well, we've talked about the pieces I've done that try and illuminate the connections and the encounters historically between Native Americans and white European cultures.
Exactly.
I mean, that goes back many hundreds of years, but that's still going on today.
Yeah.
But I've written 4 anti-war pieces, 2 in about one war, the one that George Bush started in 2003. When our former president, most recent former president, got elected, I was mortified, like many people, and I didn't write anything for a long time. I was just sort of stunned by it. And then I got invited to go to Civitella, a artist residency in Italy, in Umbria. And I had gotten an email while there from Kathy Sapovi and Keeve Wilson, who we talked about earlier. Kathy, the great pianist, Keeve, the great oble player. And Kathy said, I got a new duo. And if you're interested in, blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't a commission thing, but when I got to Italy, I was sitting there and I just had reread Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. If you want to sear your brain, read that book about how we came to be where we are. And I said to myself, Kathy, Keeve, Howard Zinn, People's History, Donald Trump. So I said, okay, I'm going to write a piece that I ended up calling A Lament and Cry for These United States. So that was about our current situation. This was in 2017, dealing with what was going on in Washington with the president we had and the things that he was doing, did, and of course to this day continues to do, even though he's out of office. So I'm interested in telling those kinds of stories too, that are about the politics of our nation. The pandemic wiped out a new piece I wrote for the Naked Eye Ensemble, Zuping Song's Naked Eye Octet Ensemble out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. For that octet and an actor-singer, Lisa Carr, who's a wonderful performer here in New York. It uses Ferlinghetti poems. Right? The second poem, piece I'm going to play next for you is Lawrence Ferlinghetti poem. And his poem, I Am Waiting, and another one called Pity the Nation. So those are direct commentaries on the fact that Donald Trump was our president. And I wanted it to be premiered before the election, and it was going to be in May of 2020, and then in Lancaster, and then a New York City October premiere. But of course, you know what happened. Whoosh, everything got wiped out, and that's still waiting for its premiere. The good thing about it, it's relevant, even though things have changed in DC. So,
well,
I guess we don't need a segue.
I think
you set up your next piece.
You set
very
yourself
nicely
up.
Yeah.
You're hired. Yes. You're hired as your
Would you like me
third
to
co-host.
say what the piece is?
I would love that.
It's going to be an improvisation, since we talked about improvisation. Me on the piano improvising while I speak Lawrence Ferlinghetti's poem from Coney Island of the Mind, his great collection from 1958. And it's called Number 11 in the book. The version we did with Big Tent, the group I mentioned before, we call it The World is a Beautiful Place to be Born Into.
Well, I can't wait to hear it. Without further ado, once again, Jerome Kitzke.
Is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't mind happiness not always being so very much fun. If you don't mind a touch of hell now and then, just when everything is fine. Because even in heaven, they don't sing all the time. The world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't mind some people dying all the time, or maybe only starving some of the time, which isn't half so bad if it isn't you. Oh, the world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't much mind a few dead minds in higher places, or a bomb or two now and then in your upturned faces, or such other improprieties as our name brand society is prey to. With its men of distinction, its men of extinction, and its priests and other patrolmen, and its various segregations and congressional investigations and other constipations that our fool flesh is heir to. Yes, the world is the best place of all for a lot of such things as making the fun scene and making the love scene and making the sad scene and singing low songs and having inspirations and walking around looking at everything and smelling flowers and goosing statues and even thinking and kissing people and making babies and wearing pants and waving hats and dancing and going swimming in rivers on picnics in the middle of the summer and just generally living it up. Yes. But then, right in the middle of it comes the smiling mortician.
Well, that was really cool.
You're moving.
Where can listeners go if we can send them somewhere to find out more about your work?
Well, a couple of places. Innova Records, I have about 4 or 5 recordings, a couple that are completely my works, and then other recordings that are compilations that include pieces of mine. The internet being what it is, if you Google my name, Jerome Kitzke, and click on video, a ton of live performance videos will pop up. Some of them are really quite fun.
Do you have your own YouTube channel, or do you not do that?
I do not have any personal. I'm not really a social media kind of guy.
God bless you.
But I'm published. My music is published by Peer Music. If some budding pianist wanted to play the Green Automobile, they could go to peermusic.com and find it there somehow.
Well, that'd be wonderful, and I hope they do. Well, Jerome, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your work with us.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
This is your first time playing live in a while, right?
Yes, actually, it's the first time I played the real piano in 16 months.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
When you asked me about this, it was not that long ago, so
Yeah.
I was practicing every day on my digital weighted keyboard, which I hadn't touched in 18 months either.
Wow.
Because I've been playing this organ I mentioned, the Nord organ, mostly. And so, yeah, it was, you got my piano muscles back up to.
Well, that's great to
Great
hear.
performances.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You still got it. Well, again, thanks to Jerome Kitzke for joining us today on this live and local episode of Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all kinds who make their home here in Upper Manhattan. If you have a moment, please show us some love right now by rating and reviewing this show on Apple Podcasts. It really does help. Thanks to Hudson View Gardens here for having us, and to hidesites.com for uptown promotional support. Be sure to follow us on our social media at Inwood Artworks to keep up with all that we do, which includes the Inwood Film Festival, Filmworks Al Fresco, pop-up art galleries, live performances, and so much more. If you'd like, you could support us here at our free program, Inwood Artworks On Air, by making a tax-free donation at inwoodartworks.nyc. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York State Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, and in part by a grant from the New York City and Company Foundation, with partial support from Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims
And I'm Jonathan Bell.
for Inwood Artworks On Air.